in as you go, Rusty.
We'll put you at the end of the table.
Make a statement.
Well, gentlemen, the occasion, of course, is the naming of the first Apollo flight crew. Now, the crewmen will be Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Gus Grissom, Lieutenant Colonel Edward H. White, and Lieutenant Roger B. Chaffee. Now, I think you all know all these gentlemen. I'm not going to identify the rest of the people here on the stage, at the moment anyway. Of course, Gus Grissom made the second flight in the Mercury program. That was MR4 back in July '61, I believe it was. And he was the first of the astronauts to make 2 space flights, being the command pilot in the first Gemini crew, Gemini number 3. And now he will be the commander of the first Apollo flight mission. And I think that must be obvious to everyone that early in these programs, it's very important to have our coolest and oldest heads in the business. Oldest. And I mean old only in the point of experience, Gus. Of course, you know Ed White. He's become a pretty famous man in the last year, and I believe this will be Roger Chaffee's first space flight, and of course we wish all these men extremely well. Now the backups, or the backup crew, would be Lieutenant Colonel James McDivitt, Major David Scott, who is at the center right now but is not able to be here, and Mr. Russell L. Schweikert of NASA. The far end of the table, as you may have guessed by now, is Joe Shea, the manager of the Apollo program. I think it would be appropriate at this time maybe to ask Gus for a few words.
Well, I didn't know I was going to have to say anything today. I'm real pleased to be on the first flight and looking forward to it. I've just now started getting into the Apollo systems and looking at Apollo spacecraft and trying to forget everything I knew about Gemini. I think we've got a real good crew with Ed and Roger, and then with Jim and Rusty and Dave Scott backing us up. Well, I think we've got a good crew. We'll have a good flight. Anybody else cares anything?
Speak, Ed. No, I'm quite pleased to be named on the first Apollo flight. As you might know, when we came in here, we were assigned and worked primarily in the Apollo area until we were fortunate enough to get, till I was fortunate enough to get pulled off and get to fly Gemini. And it's nice to be back in working in Apollo. We are working in the systems right now, getting up to speed, and I think we'll all be looking forward to the flight.
Roger?
I've been working in the Apollo system since I joined NASA about 2 years ago, and needless to say, I'm extremely excited about being named to this flight crew, and I think I've got a couple of the greatest men in the world to work with. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Joe, would you look?
No, I don't have much to say. It's just kind of a pleasure to finally get some men in the manned space part of Apollo. This unmanned part of the program has been going on a little bit too long. I got one minor bone to pick with Gus. Since Apollo is derived very heavily from Mercury and Gemini, and we rely extremely much on that experience, I don't really want him to forget what he's learned in Gemini, but rather to bring it with him, and I suspect that's really what he's going to do.
I'm only going to forget the bad things.
You keep telling me there weren't any. Well, I think it's a great crew. I think that Gus has shown he's a good commander, and I look forward to the whole Apollo team working with these guys and beginning what I hope will be a long and successful Apollo flight schedule.
Joe, I'm sure they'd appreciate some indication of the extent of the experiments to be carried in the first flight, or any particular maneuver. Seeing Ed White here might raise questions about EVA.
No, for Ed's benefit, the hatch will be firmly closed in the Apollo. We don't open the hatch until Block 2. The mission itself is something a little different for a first manned flight than we've done before. The mission is, there are 2 missions like this in the Block 1 part of the program. The prime purpose of the mission is to really exercise the spacecraft and the crews in Earth orbit. So you recognize that we will have had only 2 relatively short flights, the one that we had last month and the upcoming Flight 202 that will be sometime this summer. The first mission, however, rather than restricting it to any arbitrary number of orbits before the mission starts, will be what we would call an open-ended mission. The intent is to make, in effect, a series of decisions for the first 6 orbits, essentially a decision each orbit that the spacecraft is operating properly and is therefore go. I think you're aware after about 6 orbits there's a fairly major commitment then, hopefully for a long period of time. And we would then, after about the first 6 orbits, expect to make go decisions roughly once a day. The intent is to exercise the systems as long as they keep operating properly, recognizing that on a first flight like this, some problems might come up, and that's really why we're flying the flight. Everything working properly, we might go 12 to 14 days in the limit on the mission. As far as the experiments are concerned, there'll be primarily medical experiments on the first mission. I think there are some 10 total. Most of these have been done in the Gemini program, and these are repeats of them because this would be, if it went all the way, one of the longer missions that we've run.
I'd just like to make quite clear that this first manned flight will not necessarily be on number 204. It could be very well be on 204, but it only will be if the intervening events are such that we are able to do that.
That's right.
All right, gentlemen, do you have questions? Ben?
Do we have Lieutenant Chaffee's license?
Navy lieutenant.
No, I mean, we have a
Oh,
pilot,
I'm sorry.
command pilot, pilot.
Oh. Well, I was, you have designations, Gus? I asked if possible.
Well, we really haven't come up with the name for the positions yet. I think tentatively we've sort of looked at it as being a command pilot, senior pilot, and pilot role, but we haven't officially designated the positions at this time.
John?
Any indication when this flight will take place?
First quarter.
It's presently scheduled for the first quarter of '67. Assuming it's on 204.
Well, which one is the navigator, the senior pilot or the pilot?
I think the reason why we haven't designated any person as the navigator or a systems engineer, as we have somewhat in the past worked along these lines, is that it's really a 3-man operation, and there won't be any one person doing the navigation nor any one person doing strictly the systems. They'll have people that will be up for a period of time while one of the crew members will be sleeping. So you can see that you obviously can't have somebody sitting in the commander's seat, the same man the whole flight. It'll be swapping around, so there'll be a navigator, and he'll be all 3 men. All 3 men will be fully qualified navigators, systems engineers.
You're saying that you'll be cross-trained to be able to step into anybody's, or sit into anybody's seat.
That's right. That's the only way you can do it, when you have to realize one man has to be down sleeping for some of the period of time when 2 men are up, roughly a 6 to 8 hour period.
Thank you.
Will there be any rendezvous practice on this mission?
No rendezvous planned on this one at this time.
Unlike Gemini, therefore, one of the crew members will be awake at all times.
We plan to have one crew member awake all the time.
I realize that this isn't a flight to the moon, but if it were, which two men would go down to the surface of the moon? Which two men you would go into the LEM?
I'm not sure this has been resolved at this time.
I don't think the
If
planning
it was
office.
If it was this crew, I would be me and somebody else.
Very good.
Are they all medical experiments, Dr. Shea, or are you having any scientific and engineering type?
Let's see. I guess there are two minor.
There are two scientific experiments on board, photographing weather and the land masses, and I believe there's one other technical one.
The nephelometer.
The nephelometer, that's right.
Oh, that's for the inside the spacecraft. That's right.
The rest of them are medical.
What is that? I can't even pronounce it. What is it?
It measures nephils.
That essentially measures the dust particles in the spacecraft.
Nephil is a Greek word for clouds or something like that, and it measures the dustiness or the opacity of the atmosphere in the cabin.
The turbidity.
Turbidity is the right. Rusty. Nice to have smart guys on the crew.
At last. I can predict right now that most of the jokes will come about the nephelometer.
Is your planning far enough advanced that you know how high up you'll be on this flight?
Yeah, the initial injection is in orbit 85 perigee by about 130. It'll be circularized. Then there are a number of burns, 7 or 8 on the service module engine, since that's one of the major things that we're checking out. And we may get up to as high as 200, 235 miles, thereabouts.
That's right.
Yeah.
Since Mr. Shea has indicated that he realizes that some problems might occur on an open-ended flight, will the recovery forces be more extensive in the Apollo program than they have been in Gemini?
No, I don't think so. We would plan to use the same recovery areas. My impression is they've worked out pretty well, even in somewhat emergency situations.
Dr. Shea, could you give us a rundown then on the flight plan for that mission? What will be primarily important on the first manned mission and secondary objectives and things like that?
I'd prefer not to do it in nauseating detail. Basically, the primary things we're doing is literally engineering experimentation on the spacecraft. That's one reason why the number of other experiments are so small. We want to do a number of burns on the service module engine of various degrees, see how it operates after it's been soaked in space, reached equilibrium cold temperatures, see what minimum impulse we can get out of it, because we have to trade off between the reaction control system and the service module engine and some of the lunar parts of the mission. We'll be doing using the guidance and navigation system, which, as you know, contains both a scanning telescope and a sextant, and we'll be seeing how well we can determine from Earth orbit the trajectory of the spacecraft. Also seeing from low Earth orbital altitudes how well we can shoot stars with things like the sextant, and by and large working out the accuracies, if you will, of the guidance and navigation system. In most of the other systems, we will have on board the S-band communication system. It will be backed up with a VHF communication system of the kind that we have been using, and this will be the first flight of the S-band. We'll be qualifying it for follow-on missions, both Earth orbital and lunar. And I think you know on the follow-on Apollo missions we will use for almost all the communications at lunar ranges what we call the unified S-band equipment, which provides not just communications but also the tracking necessary for determining orbits from the ground. In the area of the thermal control system, we have a number of problems that we are interested in, primarily involved in the behavior of the spacecraft under various thermal conditions, how effective the radiators are, under what conditions we wind up boiling water, and we'll be putting the spacecraft into a series of fixed attitudes for fixed periods of time under various power loads in order to observe the radiator and overall thermal efficiency of the system. The other subsystems, stabilization and control, there are a number of modes of operation in stabilization and control. We'll be playing with those in order to determine how effective they are in the space operations itself. Setting up various of the inline, nominal, and emergency situations for all of the systems. We have a large number of redundant systems on the spacecraft, and we want to exercise them in essentially most of the permutations and combinations we'd expect to see on the lunar flights. That will take a fair part of the time. By and large, then a very detailed exercising of the spacecraft systems in order to be sure that things operate as they have been designed. In certain instances, getting some on-orbit design information which we'll use for the Block 2 and later spacecraft flights.
How about the reentry speeds? What reentry patterns are you looking towards? Speeds?
No, we'll just be coming in normal Earth orbit reentry conditions. This will not be anything like we've been doing on 201 or 202.
Will there be a real-time TV?
I believe there will be real-time TV. Well, excuse me, there will be TV available from the spacecraft. How it works into real time, I will not commit to at this point in time.
We have a switch.
There might be an embarrassing moment or two.
The cool producer in the sky.
Yeah.
Has a decision been made, Joe, on what suits the crew will wear?
Yeah, we're using the Gemini suit. I forget the exact model number or cut, but it. No, it's not the lightweight suit.
Standard Gemini suit?
Standard Gemini.
Standard Gemini.
It's called the A1C, and it's not. It's basically the G4C with a few minor modifications, such as the position is a stand-up position in it primarily, and there's a modification there so you can stand up more comfortably. The shoulders are a little bit more designed for optimum mobility. Basically, it's a G4C suit.
Back there.
Dr. Gilruth, would you absolutely rule out the possibility of this flight this year?
Oh, I wouldn't like to say any more than that. If it goes on 204, it's scheduled for the first quarter next year. I wouldn't like to be categoric about anything these days.
I have a question on the orbital parameters. Will you be launching on the same azimuth heading and using the same tracking stations? And when will you change over, et cetera?
I believe we are launching on essentially the same orbits, and it's pretty much. It'll look pretty much like a Gemini flight from the flight control point of view, except for the new systems involved and the different telemetry formats and so on. Somewhat larger delta V on board the spacecraft.
Follow-on to that, when will your tracking station, the 3 tracking stations that will be able to follow the trajectory all the way to the moon, when will they come into commission?
Oh, they will gradually come into commission during this year and next year, but recognize they're only for deep space operations. What we've done is outfit most of the existing manned spaceflight stations that have been used in Mercury and Gemini with S-band equipment, and they're used primarily for the Earth orbital part of the operation. It's only when you get out to ranges of 10,000 miles or more that you're far enough away to come back to use just the 3 stations located around the Earth.
I assume you'll be spending the rest of the year strictly on Apollo. What are going to be some of the first things you're going to be doing in your training?
Well, the training will go pretty much as it did in Gemini. We'll spend a great deal of time with the spacecraft. And then as our Apollo mission simulator comes into being, why, of course, we'll do the major portion of our training there.
When do you expect to have the simulator ready?
I don't know the new date, but it should be within a month, 6 weeks, I think, starting to work. First part of May.
be very little difference in training for this Apollo flight than training for the Gemini flight, except different equipment.
Different equipment. Right.
Perhaps on the first flight will be a little more emphasis on systems review. And the systems are a little more complex, so it's going to take a little more time to do them, learn them. This is what we've been doing today. As a matter of fact, we were in a briefing on the service propulsion system and the command module RCS system all day.
Steve, go ahead, Art.
Let me ask two questions. The first one is when, Gus, did you and White and Chaffee know of your selection yourselves? And the second question is the planning date also within the third quarter or first quarter of '67, or is the planning date earlier? I assume you have a planning date you're working toward.
Well, officially, we found out about it today. You can't feel comfortable about it until everybody's been told. And I don't think I understood the second part of your question.
Well, let's go back to the first question, and I'll ask you unofficially when you knew about it.
Well, I don't know when it was.
Some time ago.
Some time ago, I don't know.
A month, maybe?